Mr. Boala, you know, there's an argument out there now that, you know, when we talk about the involvement of our security agencies in the electoral process, that there's need for us to really kind of transit from the issue of quantity to quality. What are your thoughts about the idea that if the police force, for example, just as they eventually instituted SARS to deal with robbery, for example, if they were to just very carefully compile a set of specialized officers to deal with electoral management and some of the associated issues, that this could go a long way in terms of you know, dealing with these issues. What are your thoughts about that?
I agree. But then the other problem will be, you know the number of police we have in the country, and you know the United Nations requirement per police and policing the people. So assuming we are, because it is from the police we got the EFCC, because police in the past were prosecuting financial crimes. And then President Obasanjo came and I felt we need to have specialized people to be given specialized training for the purposes of prosecuting financial crimes. They created the EFCC. And we have seen success so far. But that's because if you look at the mandate of EFCC and look at their financing, and the kind of enormous powers, there is even right now an institutional conflict between EFCC and the police when it comes to prosecution. People have this apathy that police is giving. If you go to ICPC, they will tell you we do more work than the police, than the EFCC. But emphasis is more on EFCC because of funding, attention, media, and all of that. Assuming we are bringing that into the to the police, you know, to the case of the police, extrapolating or extracting key men and giving them specialized training for the purposes of arresting this kind of situation. Then the question I will ask is, how many are you going to require per state? How many polling units do you have in a local government? And I know that for you to successfully prosecute that, in my opinion, you must have in a particular polling unit police officers that will not be less than 20 at least.
20?
Yes.
But will that be just police officers? Because normally they have a combination,
right?
Both civil defense.
So civil defense cannot arrest and prosecute because whatever operations of any security platform must be consistent with the mandate. For example, even if DSS is there, DSS know that by their mandate they have a limited jurisdiction in terms of crime that is of a nature that interferes with internal security. That is the one that DSS will arrest. They cannot go outside of the bounds of their mandate. Now, but the police are the ones that have the wider power. So if you're going to have this type of specialized training, how many of them? Remember, we're talking about funding. So is this achievable within the little time we have before 2019, or are we going to look at it in the long term?
If I could follow up with that, you know, even if we were to do that, right, and have that set up, how do we deal with what seems to be dogging us year on year on a regular basis, where whoever is at the center, at whatever point now, at the federal or state, they have this influence on institutions. Right. So in this case, how won't they affect this particular setup if that were the case?
Again, it comes down to the issue of institutional building. Now, we've been saying that, and it bears repeating. We will never stop talking about it until we can point at certain institutions and say they are doing well. To an extent, for example, if you're looking at the institution in Nigeria, if you take, for example, a case study of EFCC, to a large extent, even if you are against them, you know that they have achieved some things considerably. But if you look at the operations of EFCC and their mandate, and you look at political activities in Nigeria, are you satisfied that EFCC is actually carrying out financial crimes prosecution? Because there is even an allegation that when you move from one political party to the other, you get immunity that is not expressly stated by law. Even if there is a pending case in EFCC, the rate and the speed with which the trial continues is something else. Now, look at, for example, America. Look at the what do you call it, the Department of Justice, just like our Federal Ministry of Justice. Jeff Sessions is under pressure. That why didn't he recuse himself, since he was an appointee of the president? He stood his ground. Yesterday, he was invited to the White House, few minutes before going in, because earlier in the day, Donald Trump said some things about him. He also reacted. That's because they have a strong institution. If we are to be in Nigeria, as he enters the White House, he loses his job. So now, which institution in the country? I will also give you another graphic example. Before 2015 election, DSS became so common to the common man that almost everything that happens in the country, there is a press briefing in the 2015 election. They went beyond their bounds. They fought, some of them fought against the current president and his administration. Today they are working for him. The army was the same set of was the same institution that said he didn't have certificate. Today they are working for him. The same police that at the point they wanted to arrest some key people from that political party, today they are working for them. So it seems because we have weaker institutions, anybody that is in the helm of affairs, whether at the federal level or at the state level, seems to have considerable influence on institutions.
Mr. Bola, you raised a very interesting example, and I want to just piggyback off that to look at another issue. When we talk about criminal justice administration, and particularly, the issues of how campaigns and politics in general are financed, you cited kind of the famous Donald Trump example, which is going on in the United States now. And one of the things you see is a clamp down on the associates first, getting them to, really compiling cases against them, getting them to plead guilty. At that point, they begin to sing against their principal. The facts are accumulated, and eventually they get to the principal. This kind of bottom-up approach. What we've seen in Nigeria, and I've been watching this, is obviously if I cite the case of Senate President Bukola Saraki, we tend to go from the top down, or maybe just the top, really. We go after the big fish, but then ultimately the prosecution fails because the individuals that may or that are alleged to be involved in whatever scandal is in question are never questioned. There's never a case against them, so there's really no case to build on. They're just going after the top guy. Right. Do you think there's a need for us, if we talk about campaign finance and some of these other issues, to really look at how we prosecute crimes, alleged crimes and actual crimes, by going from the bottom to the top, since individuals that are alleged to have been involved in corruption are clearly using cronies and proxies to achieve their aims? Now,
this point you said is the upper echelon of law enforcement. Like in the US, the FBI are like ghosts in terms of their modus operandi. The direction in which they come at you is not direct. In Nigeria, first of all, the media house, the news media will cover it, that you are the target. And before they get to you, you've already covered your backs. But if FBI is coming after you, you will never know, before you get to know, all of your aides have been investigated, and in some cases even arrested. And then to talk about plea bargain, that the American government, the American institutions basically use as a strategy. In Nigeria, when we talk about plea bargain, people don't want to listen. Now, let me bring it down to the example you cited, the Senate president. In the case of the Senate president, it may be difficult for you to start from the bottom top, because if you look at the very issue for which it's being prosecuted, is not one that requires some administrative work. But if it is the president that is in the radar, definitely you have to start from the bottom. If it is a governor.
Why do you say in the case of the Senate president, there is no need for administrative work?
Okay. One of the allegations against the Senate president is the fact that some gunmen or armed robbers were arrested, and they were alleged to have connection with him. So this has nothing to do with, for example, his personal aide in the office. It has nothing to do with, for example, his special advisor. You're
referring to OFA. Sorry, just to be clear, I'm referring to the CCT. I'm referring to the allegation that Quara funds were used to bribe properties abroad using bank proxies, using proxies within the Quara state government. That was the allegation. Right. That's what I'm referring to.
Well, I will agree then with your point. However, most of the prosecution in Nigeria are politically motivated. So that's why they don't go all out. Even the law enforcement agencies, sometimes when you have a personal conversation with them, they express their frustration. They will comment something, and then midway they will be asked to stop, or they will be asked to pipe down. So this is the problem. Otherwise, take for example, if it is EFCC investigating him, or code of conduct, whatever, because it will still relate to EFCC investigating financial crimes. They will start by dealing with the banks.
Okay. Well, we'll continue from that particular point, hopefully, when we'll come back in a moment. Stay with us.